Whistlepig just released a $600 straight rye whiskey aged in fermented agave, cocoa, and chili pepper casks. Is it gimmicky? Yes. Is it ridiculous, bordering on unnecessary? Absolutely. Is it worth $600? That's what we're gonna figure out today. Let's get straight into it. So, Whistlepig, very famous rye whiskey maker based up in Vermont. They source a lot of their juice from MGP out in Indiana and make some of their own stuff on site as of 2015. They make some tasty, budget-friendly-ish rye whiskeys that you can find on most liquor stores in the United States, but that is not really what they're best known for, at least amongst the high-end collectors market. Over the years, they've developed a reputation for, shall we say, gimmicky releases. For lack of a better comparison, I'd say they're sort of like the supreme of the whiskey world. They recently released a wheat whiskey proofed with liquid death water, another one that made use of barrels that were charred with a solo stove, and then one that was released in collaboration with Formula One Racing that was subjected to G-forces. Not sure exactly how they did that, but if you're interested, I would recommend you go read up on it. Nowhere is this passion for ridiculousness more evident than in their annual Boss Hog series. Each year, they trot out a new insanely expensive whiskey finished in increasingly zany casks, usually ones that they've created on site specifically for these releases. Boss Hog 9 was seasoned in casks finished with fig nectar, Boss Hog 10 in mead casks, and Boss Hog 11 was in casks that were seasoned with Indian spice. Which brings us to Boss Hog 12, which might just be the craziest release in this series yet. I'm gonna be honest with you, when I first read the product description for this one, I had some reservations. It sounded maybe a little too wild to come together into something actually tasty, but we'll see. I haven't tried this yet. I'm gonna go through the details really quick, and then we'll see whether or not it's worth the price. The story for this begins with pulque, a frothy pre-Hispanic beverage made with agave sap. Folk in Mexico have been drinking pulque for thousands of years, and it is widely considered to be the precursor to tequila, mezcal, and everything else that we know from modern agave spirits. If you've never tried it before, I would liken its flavor to a sort of kombucha with a bit of a vegetal lactic edge. It's not a flavor profile for everybody, and it's pretty much impossible to find here in the United States. It has a very, very short shelf life of around 72 hours, so if it's going to be made in Mexico, it's pretty much never going to be finding its way north of the border. There's a bit of folklore you'll hear ever so often, wherein a lightning bolt struck an agave plant growing in the field. It cracked open, burned, and oozed out a boozy fermented liquid that people could drink and sort of bring them closer to the gods. That liquid being pulque. Pulque eked in and out of obscurity over the years and has recently gotten kind of a resurgence, particularly in Mexico City, amongst the younger hipster crowd at pulquerias, where it's often served flavored with different fruits and vegetables and whatnot. To put it another way, this is the perfectly obscure slash up-and-coming thing that Whistlepig would latch onto for a new Boss Hog release. And the fact that it's difficult to find here in the United States probably made it all the more desirable to them. So the team went down to Mexico, learned a few things about pulque production, and then learned about another pre-Hispanic beverage called xocolotl. We'll put the spelling down below. I'm sure I'm butchering that. It being a spicy chocolate beverage consumed by the Aztecs and Mayans. It's not boozy or fermented, though you'll usually find quite a bit of spices in it that add a bit of a spicy kick, akin to, dare I say, a rye whiskey. Instead of buying the stuff straight from the source, the team went back to Vermont and then recreated it at home, creating a sort of mix of pulque, xocolotl, and spicy peppers that they then blended together into a frothy fermented batch, seasoned these casks, and then finished their rye whiskey for a period of 2 weeks. Wherever you fall on the gimmick versus value side of the spectrum, I do think it's a pretty cool experiment just to sort of say that they did it, though I do think if it was done by a different name, really any other name in the whiskey market, it would not cost $600, and it wouldn't be one of these sort of unobtainium bottlings that becomes more and more expensive on the secondary market year after year. But that's not a knock against the liquid, that's just Whistlepig. That's how Whistlepig does things. They're probably going to continue doing things like this, and I'm sure by the time Boss Hog 13 comes around, it'll be crazier and more expensive than ever before. So let's give it a try. Right off the bat, I'll say this bottle is heavy. It's not the craziest decanter I've ever seen, but it has this really thick plate of glass down on the bottom that must add an extra pound. And as usual for these Boss Hog bottlings, there is a pig up on the cork, dressed in the garb of whatever inspiration they're rolling with that year. He looks like a cool dude, even if he definitely shies away from direct eye contact. My understanding is that the proof point can vary a little bit on this based on which barrel you get. So this being barrel 10, it is proofed at 52.4% ABV. I think the highest being 54.2% ABV if you can find one of those on the secondary market, most likely. I don't get a ton of agave on the nose from this, but it is very chocolatey and very spicy. I think more akin to a mole than a pulque. Ginger, gingerbread, toffee pudding, and then a lot of sort of poblano pepper spice. It's not like Hot Ones last dab level spice, but very savory, very earthy, and a little bit smoky too. If I was smelling this blind, I would probably have guessed this was a liqueur. In fact, if you've ever tasted or smelled Ancho Reyes, I would say that's the pretty perfect comparison, though dialed up with a bit of that rye whiskey edge. It's properly spicy on the palate too. This only finished in those casks for 2 weeks, but I easily would have guessed it was a year or two. It's two very different kinds of spice that play off each other shockingly well, right? On the one hand, you have your baking spice, your anise, your cloves, your cinnamon. On the other hand, you have your spicy spice, right? Your ancho chili, your poblano, your jalapeno. It coats the mouth in this really thick, viscous mouthfeel that just goes in every direction. There's some maple and nutmeg notes too that sort of bounce around on the finish, but pretty much nothing distracts from this being a spice bomb through and through, in a very, very good way. If you can't tell from that description, I would definitely say it's a little overwhelming after a few sips. This is the kind of thing I imagine drinking after a full Thanksgiving dinner. I'm stuffed to the brim and I just need something to ease it all down with a bit of a high proof edge. Is it worth $600? I don't know. If, like me, you are attracted to this because you are a tequila lover and you are intrigued by the inclusion of pulque on the label, I will say that the agave influence is marginal to none on the final product. Not necessarily a bad thing, but don't go into this expecting anything akin to a tequila or mezcal cask finish. Instead, you get spice. You get a 3-course meal. You get a ton of maple and crunchy green jalapeno notes straight in your face on the finish. It's delicious stuff, and honestly, it's kind of a shame. I imagine a lot of people who are going to buy this are going to leave it in their box, collecting dust on their shelf until they can resell it on the secondary market down the road. If you see one of these bottles on the back bar or you have a collector friend with one knocking around, I would highly recommend asking for a sip. I can only imagine what Boss Hog has cooking up next year. So until then, we will see you here on the Tequila Pour.